Okay, hello and welcome to another one of these fantastic live streams. My name is Barry O'Reilly, and today I'm going to be joined by Martin Erickson, author of Decision Stack, to share a little bit about both of our books. We did a launch event in London last week. It was 3 times oversubscribed. So what we said we'd do is we'd do a little bit of an event. We'd come back on, share with everybody a little bit about what was our inspiration for the book, a couple of the models that they may find useful. And then we'll dive into those today. So to get going, welcome Martin to the live stream. How are you doing?
Thanks very much, Barry. I think I'm better than you. You just got off a plane from Doha, so I'm guessing you're a bit knackered at this point.
Yeah, I landed from Doha a colossal, I think 3 hours ago. So I got home. I've had some dinner with my family, which is a bit of a treat after a long road trips. But yeah, great to be back, and after a series of events we did in London and Dublin. It's been a really real fun time. So for folks then, they've been following you for many years. I'm sure they know you from Mind the Product and all the great work you did there. You wrote another fantastic book on product leadership, but then you decided to strike out on your lonesome and write the Decision Stack. So why don't you tell people a little bit about what was your inspiration for writing the book, and tell people a little bit of the origin story?
Yeah, I think it was really started in a way after product leadership, right? So product leadership was an excuse for us to go interview 150 product leaders about what the best teams look like, and really report back kind of what they said, right? And I think the short, really short TLDR version of product leadership is that the best teams are the ones closest, or that can make decisions closest to the customer, right? So empowered teams, they're closest to the customer, they have all the data, they can move fastest, make the best decisions. And that was really what came out of that book. And then in the kind of 10 years since that, I've been trying to help teams move into that world. And obviously it's what we all aspire to. But I've realized that there's another piece missing, right? Which is that strategic clarity, or that intent or alignment that actually lets them be empowered and lets them run at speed. And there's been lots of elements of this in the past, right? I mean, we have OKRs, we have the concept of strategy, we have like all these tools, but they never seem to connect in most of the organizations that I walk into. And so that realization really brought around the early model for the Decision Stack, which first came out 7 years ago. And then I've been building on it and honing it and testing it ever since. And then luckily enough, a bunch of people have been asking me to write a book. So I had that pull and I had that demand for more of that information and more of that content. So here we are 7 years later.
Well, it's funny you say 7 years, because it does. I still remember you doing those sort of working sessions with Nate and Richard, even like preparing to launch it at Mind the Product. So for you then, how do you think, especially with so much that's changing at the moment in product management, the tasks people once were expected to do, but now can have some augmented support, what sort of changed about not only that leadership, but the strategy that people have to come up with?
I think it's just become ever more important, right? Suddenly, all this new tooling, I mean, technology forever has just made us go faster and faster and faster. And I think AI is only accelerating that at an unprecedented pace. And so for me, it's really, the risk is most organizations, if they don't have this clarity, if they don't have that kind of focus, are going to start running in lots of different directions, right? And really quickly. And so when you start running in the wrong direction at the speed of machine, it really has dire consequences, right? You lose a lot of focus, you can lose customers along the way, you lose that, that ineffable thing that made your product great in the first place. And it's just compounding kind of in a negative way. And so I think it's more important than ever. And I didn't write the book about AI, but I think it's more timely than ever because of it, to have that clarity and really be able to pull everyone in the same direction and then let them loose, right? That's the whole point, is building these empowered teams, is letting them run as fast as they humanly can and as fast as the agents in their teams can, but in the right direction, in the same direction, and towards that common goal that we have as an organization.
Right. So, and what I remember as well is that you didn't just make up the Decision Stack last week, right? Like, you've literally been using this framework for over 7 years. So can you talk us through a little bit about what the Decision Stack is and how people can use it?
Yes, it started very much as a product leadership tool, I would say. So it started with I think I originally did have vision, strategy, and then OKRs, but then I had like epics, because that's kind of what the language we were using a lot at the time, of like, what are those bigger pieces or initiatives that we're working on as a product team, and then principles underneath. As I've been working with it and bringing it into teams, I've realized that it's not just a product tool, it is a tool for the whole organization. And so it's really about thinking more broadly, and even I think bringing in a more agnostic view of how these connections happen, right? So I'm just going to pull up my slides very quickly, and we will see if we can do that smoothly. Can you see the screen? I think Barry has to let me share my slides. So as I've kind of abstracted this out and I've been working with organizations more broadly with the decision stack, I've realized that fundamentally it comes down to 5 questions, right? Where are we going as an organization? How are we going to get there? What matters right now on that journey, and how do we measure progress? What are the actions we're going to take to move forward? And then finally, how do we choose between those actions? And I've abstracted it this way because I don't really care what people use to answer these questions. I know a lot of people have strong feelings about OKRs, especially, which I use in the middle. But if you want to use other tools, that's fine. There's VMOS, there's NCTs, there's a lot of other frameworks to actually solve that problem of translating strategy into measurable goals, but you still have to have that answer. And most importantly, it has to connect. So I think I showed this in London as well, right? But all of these things connect from the top to bottom by answering the question how, and then they connect from the bottom to the top by answering the question why. And like I said, I use vision, strategy, objectives, opportunities, and principles to answer those questions, but what you use is not as important as you actually have answers to them. And so with that, I think it's really taken it from just a product tool to an organizational tool. And as I was at EQT, one of the world's largest private investors, I took it out to nearly 150 portfolio companies that I touched in my time there. And at varying levels, they've adopted parts of this and really just adopted that connection piece, right? I think every organization I go into, every organization I see out there in the world has a decision stack. You might not call it that, but you have a set of decisions that answer those questions, right? You have at some point set out a vision. You have at some point tried to formulate a strategy. You probably have some, goals or OKRs in a spreadsheet somewhere. The biggest problem is that they simply don't connect.
Nice. We're getting a bunch of questions here online. One from John Beaton. Over the last 7 years, what have been the most successful use of the decision stack? So where have you maybe put this into play? Obviously helping companies when you were at EQT, or just in general. So do you want to share maybe 1 or 2 case studies?
Yeah, so I've got a few different ones, and one of my favorites is Griffin, which is a banking as a platform startup here in London. They're growing like crazy at the moment, and the founder really adopted the decision stack from day one, but really made it his own, right? So again, he tore out bits of it. He has a purpose statement instead of a vision. He doesn't really use OKRs. Like, as a team, they've really made it their own, but he really cottoned on to that point that like connection is the most important thing. And he's used that to really drive that growth, and they're achieving incredible numbers right now, kind of underpinning every other service that wants to add banking products to their platform. There's also big, digital transformations that have really been using this to get their teams aligned. So big, gigantic companies like Novo Nordisk in Denmark, or Ørsted in Norway, in Denmark as well, sorry, one of the world's largest energy providers. They're using it to drive their digital transformation and to create that alignment across the organization and to create that empowerment, most importantly, as they're trying to drive that digital transformation. So it's kind of showing that 2 ends of the scale can really apply the same thinking, but also that you have to make it your own, right? It's not going to be one size fits all. You can't just copy paste this from anyone else. And that's really why I tried emphasizing in the book that it is a mental model, right? It's a lens through which you can look at the decisions that you already have in your organization.
There you go, folks. Go get yourself a copy of the book. It's super awesome. I'm very lucky to have an editor copy, which means the pages are even brighter and nicer and everything. So thank you, Martin, for giving me that. I enjoy reading that on the flight home. Okay, so let's flip the tables for a minute, and I'll jump in the hot seat for a few minutes for a bit of fun.
Yeah, why don't we start in the same place? Like, I know you share a bit of the origin story at the event, but talk us through, like, how did you get to this point? Because you've obviously been coaching people along the way and realize that there's a broader problem here.
Yeah, so one of the, I think maybe 6 years ago, we started our AI venture studio called Nobody Studios. And just one of the things I was hitting up against is just a capacity issue, really, and probably a cognitive overload. I was just sitting there at my desk, lots of stuff to do, lots of exciting things to do, but I was just overwhelmed. My head was full. And I just had that moment where I was like, I can't keep doing the same things and hoping something different is going to happen. And that's when I started to really reevaluate how I was working, not necessarily what I was working on, but how I was working. And that was a great question for me to start reframing, how I could get the best out of myself and then leverage these tools, if you will, to sort of amplify my natural strengths. And that was the real inspiration behind it. And one of the great things, as you know, when you're in the venture capital company, when you're looking after a portfolio of companies, there's we at the time we had nearly 14 companies running in the studio, so it was just a great opportunity to get a lot of sort of reps or iterations of like trying out how could I use these tools to help me when I had meetings with teams, how could I change the way I was working when I was doing one-on-ones, weekly meetings, both in the portfolio and for the studio. So that just gave me like a lot of opportunity to experiment and learn, I guess, in a way, like a set of practices that I sort of believed in were going to help, and I could start to see actually, have really positive sort of impact. And in a way, that's what sort of got me moving with this idea of an artificial organization. And the aha for me really was that this isn't about tools. It's not. It's actually about systems and structures, really, and creating a judgment system and infrastructure that allows you to get the best out of humans' natural sort of ability and what the machine's capabilities offer. And it became very obvious to me that the metrics, in a way, that sort of mattered the most was this ability to make decisions fast and sooner, but also make those decisions with better information and greater clarity. So this idea of decision velocity and decision advantage as key metrics sort of came out to me. And then what I saw is that the more you made better decisions, the more you had better information, it compounded. And in essence, you had less sort of decision reversals. Teams were making good decisions and then moving on to the next problem, rather than sort of getting stuck, if you will, on the same problems again and again. And that was probably the big aha for me, to a certain extent, that really got me most excited about this.
And so it almost came to you as a bit of a crisis moment. Is that how your clients and kind of the case studies have come to it as well? Or is there an aha moment or a way to kind of trigger that thought process?
That's
maybe
a great
pre-crisis.
Yeah, no, it's funny you mentioned that, right? Because in a way, I think people have their sort of coming to terms with the moment that we're in, if that makes sense, And for me, like most things, it's an obstacle, right? You're hitting up against something, you're feeling frustration, you're wondering, like, how is this going to work? And sometimes people just sort of get stuck and give up, and sometimes you sort of reinvent yourself, And actually, it's funny, it brings me back to another one of these ideas, right? Like, one of the things I talk a lot about in Unlearn, the last book, was that, you can use AI and get on this little gray line where, you write emails faster, you summarize documents quicker, you do these sort of like introductory productivity hacks. But where I've seen the biggest advantage is this real reinvention of how you work. And that often requires some sort of unlearning, right? You have to sort of get worse before you get better. But then what I've seen, whether it's having meeting co-pilots to capture every conversation that I'm in, that allow me to transcribe all the data and synthesize it, to sort of challenge myself about how I run one-on-ones better, to how I create weekly reports, to how I do quarterly reports, just capturing all this data, compounding it, and then asking myself sort of like disconfirming questions about it, like how could I have ran that meeting better? Or what are some blind spots that I might not be aware of that are actually creating issues about how I lead and support the team? And again, the thing I would always say to folks out there is you need to think that AI is not there to give you the answer. It's there to help you ask more challenging questions, both of yourself and of the data that you have. And I think that is a huge sort of difference, because when people just ask it to give the answer, you actually are giving up your judgment, right? You're telling the machine, what decision should I make based on this data, or summarize this document. The machine is making all the choices, not you. Rather than asking questions like, if you consider all of this information, what are 2 or 3 areas that I should focus on more to help me make a decision about what market we should open in? You know, and use it as a thinking partner, a teammate that you sort of can go back and forth with. I think is a huge difference for the people who really accelerate at this, and folks who just sort of stick with it. See a little limited productivity improvement.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that we kind of both touched on decisions as the core to this, right? There's a part of me maybe that wanted to rename the concept at some point, more the alignment stack or something, but it does fundamentally come down to those core decisions in our businesses, right? And I think to your point, our ability to make high quality and high velocity decisions is more important than ever. How are you seeing that changing leadership teams? Like, how are they showing up better prepared once they are kind of using AI more as a thought partner and less as just a tool, right?
Yeah, so one of my favorite bits of research that I discovered in the course of the book was a study that was run by Harvard, and they did it with Procter and Gamble, where they looked at like 776 teams about how they were using AI. And this was sort of one of the huge ahas for me, is AI is able to replicate performance, expertise, social engagement, right? So if you have an individual working without AI, they're sort of like the control, right? Like there's a level of performance they can get to. When you pair an individual with AI, they're almost as good as a team, like a human team, cross-functional, challenging, and coming up with ideas. But when you pair a team with AI, they literally get 3 times better, which is amazing. And because you're able to, again, use these tools to sort of like challenge your thinking, right? And we changed the way we did ideation in the studio as a result of this. We started to get teams to do their natural ideation, their brainstorming, their target customers, go to markets, financial models, and then they'd feed it to the machine and say, challenge this. Where's our blind spots? What are we missing? What data would be counter to this? So you're just raising this sort of intellectual bar, if you will, constantly, with a machine that has access to infinite data, that can see patterns in large that maybe are not obvious to a team, but also it's just pushing back. And I think that was another one of these sort of real aha moments for me about thinking, how do you start to augment teams with this, not replace them, but it becomes a teammate, right? Somebody who can, push the bar higher and higher.
Before we get to, we can take John's question since Barry's flashed up on the screen. What have you both noticed from people that were stuck and decided to explore our work? What helped them make that shift? Why don't you go first, Barry?
Yeah, so I have a pretty strong philosophy about if you're going to work with me. So I actually encourage people not to work with me if they're not willing to get outside their comfort zone, try new things, understand that there's no guaranteed result other than that they're going to get better by trial and error, right? And I like to push people like that. And I think if people are willing to go on a journey and recognize that they need to change, like that's where I often find the best people to work with and the best collaborations. And that's kind of what's always worked for me. I think when I meet people and they might offer endless amounts of money, but they've no interest in changing, it just becomes a really difficult, unfruitful and fun engagement, so I tend to shy away from those types of things. What about you, Martin?
Yeah, you can only beat your head against a brick wall for so many hours a day, I think. For me, I think it's very much been, and partly just coming from where I come from and my brand and what people kind of assume they hire me for, it usually comes from an execution challenge. So they often come to me because they think they have, delivery problem, things aren't moving fast enough, the roadmap isn't working, of insert the blank sort of thing. And inevitably when I come in, like, sure, I'll come in as, I'll come help you with that problem. But within, a week or two, it's quite clear that all of those things are just symptoms of the problem, which is there's no clarity and there's no strategy, or at least the strategy isn't clear to the rest of the team. And so that's really how that tends to happen for me is, you see the symptom, and then you can go up the stack and realize like, okay, well, here's the missing piece actually. And one of my favorite ways to highlight that is to individually go and ask people in the organization, what do you think our vision is? What do you think our strategy is? And especially individually in the leadership team. And it might not surprise you that the individuals in the team have different answers, but what might surprise you is the leadership team almost always has different answers as well. And being able to play that back to them is where you get that aha moment of like, oh yeah, okay, we have some work to do here. And that's not always, they might not always need me. They might actually have a pretty solid strategy and they just need to be better at communicating it and clarifying it. So it's not just about like how I work, but that seems to be the unlock for them, really realizing that, oh, so we need something to help us connect the dots a bit better here, communicate that better. And often I think they still have, almost everyone has room to improve on their strategy as well. But at least that really highlights that connection piece is missing.
Great, love it. Okay, all right. So yeah, we've lots of folks online here. It's always fun to see the numbers like flying up when we've people live. So do sort of ask us a question. We'll try and answer as many as we can. Thanks, John, for putting yours up. So Martin, maybe a question for you. What sort of like one takeaway or one of your favorite frameworks or models that you've put into the book that you sort of, you enjoy sharing with people?
I think the other favorite of mine, I bang on a lot about strategy because I think it is one of the linchpin pieces of the whole thing. But another favorite is actually at the bottom of the stack, which is principles. And that has really been an unlock for me in my career. And so it really helps unlock teams as well. And it also is something that feels closer to the day-to-day work. So something an empowered team feels like they can actually tackle, where strategy can feel like, that's somebody else's job, or I'm a bit scared to go challenge leadership. Might not have that psychological safety. So principles for me are a massively powerful tool. And the favorite framework there is simply what's called an even over statement. So it's really clarifying the trade-offs that you have in front of you and crystallizing them in that format. So the best example here for me, and from my own career, my first product job 27 years ago, Jesus, I was at Monster, the job board, right? And as a job board, it's obviously a two-sided marketplace. On the one hand, we have job seekers looking for jobs. On the other, recruiters who want to hire them. And when I joined, every single product initiative we wanted to build, we kind of had that debate. So we were like, do we do this in the job seeker friendly way, or do we do this in the recruiter friendly way? And we'd just go around the houses. I mean, we can talk about all the problems of writing PRDs for 6 months, throwing them over the wall to engineering, like good old school waterfall. But that kind of trade-off just kept coming up every single time until the founder really re-articulated and said, hang on a minute, if we build an amazing experience for job seekers, then they will come, and then recruiters have to follow because they will go where that audience is. And that just became a principle for us. It was both a strategic choice and a principle. And suddenly all those debates go away, right? Those decisions become so much easier. You just have a default choice. You don't have to debate it. You don't have to escalate. You don't really have to think about it. You don't have to get fatigued. You don't have to look at the data. You don't have to go to discovery. Like all of these things just go away, right? And so that can be incredibly powerful. And what I learned over the years as well is that, like I said, these things are at the bottom of the stack, even though they're very closely connected to strategy, because it is often the teams on the ground that see them and identify them and can call them out and say, hey, we need a principle here. I think it should be this. And then leadership does have to help make sure it's consistent across the organization, but it is one of those things that can really bubble up from the bottom of the organization. And so that's really one of my favorite tools, is just think about what are those trade-offs you keep making in your organization or even in your team every day, every week, and can you codify those into a principle? You should, of course, go do a ton of discovery and research and figure that out, but do it once, codify it, and move on.
Great. I love you said that, because as you know, that was my favorite chapter of the book as well. So very, very cool.
How about you? And I know you have quite a few good models in your book. Like what's been one of your favorites to develop?
Yeah, certainly my most favorite one has been the traits, tasks, and tools model. And really the inspiration behind this is, so many people in AI are just sort of trapped starting with tools. That's all they ask us. What tool are you using? I'm using Claude. You're using ChatGPT. Can we still be friends? All these types of questions. But the real, and then they're trying to work the tool into a set of tasks they have to do, and they have to work it into a set of traits about how they behave. And that's sort of the wrong way. I constantly remind people is starting with tools is worse because it's a codified way of doing, an opinionated way of doing work that might not suit you. Where what you need to start thinking about is yourself. How do you do your best work? Your natural behaviors, mindsets, habits, and then the tasks where you create your highest leverage sort of value, and then select the tools to support you. So the example I always give is myself, obviously being dyslexic, my natural trait was talking to create a book. So what I realized, and when I was trying to create a book, I was trying to create content. So that idea of talking and then having a journalist interview me, created and then use a transcripting service to sort of capture all of the conversations. And then suddenly I went from, taking a day to write a page to like creating, 15 pages in 40 minutes, because we would have a conversation, capture the conversation, transcribe it. The journalist would copy edit it a bit, and then send me a sort of a chapter that I could start iterating. So that was probably the big one for me. That sort of was a huge unlock, and just thinking about, using these tools to accelerate the way I do naturally do my best work, rather than trying to shoehorn what the tool's opinion is about how I should do work into the way I worked. And that was a big aha for me. Just like having puppies on the show. Look at this.
I've had to make the live stream a million times cuter because we have started getting thunderstorm here in London, and dogs do not like thunder. So
there you go.
She's in my lap. Yeah, I think you didn't make life easy for your dyslexia by going for the alliteration there, but I do think that's one of the most powerful models in the book, because it really highlights where to start this journey and where to figure out how to actually think about the work you're doing, and then start thinking about what tools to apply to that. I think it's so true for every choice we make in a business, right? When we're choosing software, it's the same thing. Like, so often we just go by what we think is the best software, and then have to like shoehorn our process into that software. I do hope that's one of the big things that changes with AI, is much more personalizable kind of software tools and malleable software. But I think that's been the historic case. So maybe that's an analogy to use as well, of think about, when you went to buy your CRM, you should have started with thinking about what are we actually trying to achieve in our business, and then pick the CRM that fits that workflow, as opposed to the other way around, right?
Yeah, nice. All right, folks. Well, look, this was just a quick 30 minutes with Martin and I. Thank you, everybody, again, who attended the event in London. Thanks, everybody who applied to attend the event in London. We've had so many requests for us to do more talks, do more sessions. We may even surprise you and do something more together in the near future. So again, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Follow myself and Martin on LinkedIn. For the scroll below, you can go to Genus Art Orgs or Genus Decision Stack to get copies of the book. If you have bought the book and read it, please, please, please do write an Amazon review. You have no idea how much it affects the ability for us to sort of share the book with more people. Amazon really indexed that. We've got one last question, Martin. I'm going to put it up if you want to read it out there, and then maybe take a crack at answering it first.
Sure. So David asks, in the case of repetitive situations where context seems to exhibit a pattern and we make the same choice as in the past, but turns out to be the wrong one, how do you share the lesson learned? So I think this really touches on one of the core ideas in the decision stack, which is that this is never a set and forget, right? No element in the stack kind of lives forever. We might set those ambition levels, right? So I tend to think about, a vision's something that lives almost, longer than we do, right? It might not be something achievable even in our lifetime. Strategy, again, depends on the maturity of the org for me, or the maturity of the product. If you're a startup, your strategy is as long as your runway. If you're a more established org, it's maybe a 3 to 5 year. I think those cycles are getting compressed, and so on down the stack, right? But I think the most important thing is that we're constantly reviewing them, right? And probably at least quarterly checking in on the entire stack. So even if your vision is, a 30, 50, 100-year vision, you want to check in that, like, does that still make sense? Has something changed in the world, especially with the way technology is changing? And so if at any point, any level of that stack doesn't make sense anymore, you can flag it much more early, right? Like strategy, where you don't want to wait 3 to 5 years before we go, oh, wait a minute, we learned in month 1 that, that core assumption that we had about our customer didn't make any sense. So that strategy didn't make any sense. We should have stopped in month 1, right? Not waited till the end of the review, the kind of strategy window to review it. And I think that's true all the way down. So principles the same. They live somewhere between that kind of quarterly cadence and your strategy cadence, but should still be reviewed every quarter. Like, do these still make sense? Is this still the right choice to make? Do we have any data that has invalidated it? And most of the time, they're just going to be check-ins, right? It's just going to be, yep, these all make sense. Cool, like, move on, right? This is not a one-day offsite every quarter to like do your strategy again. It's just a check-in. Like, are we still on the right track? Yes or no? Cool, move on. If we're not, then maybe we need to schedule more time, do a deeper dive, do more research, figure out what the other choice should be. But at least that way we're not, again, going astray too quickly or waiting too long to correct course, right?
Great. All right, and then one last question. How do you spread the lessons learned? Well, just to dive in on this one, like one tactic we used to always use in the companies I've been in, and certainly others, is this idea of lunch and learns. They're a really great way where you can, bring people along, tell everyone to get together at lunch and just have somebody share something they're trying. And it doesn't have to be a story of breakout magical success. It can be a story of, I tried this tool and it sucks. Please don't do what I did. But again, it's a fun way to get you and your colleagues together over lunch and just sort of share some of the things that you're trying and learning. Nobody has this all figured out. We're all learning together. I think that's one of the most important parts of it. What about you, Martin? Any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think the mix of formal and informal, right? So communicating formally, thinking about those cadences, how do you do all hands, like all those things that leadership hopefully knows how to do, but also the informal stuff. So you mentioned lunch and learn. I think especially in this age of AI, hackathons are a really powerful way to mix things up across the organization, get, not just your normal team sitting together and working on something, but someone from sales and someone from the other division and someone from engineering kind of sit down. They have this idea of what they want to hack. And again, to Barry's point, like sharing failures as much as kind of successes is critical to all of this as well. So could just plus one on that, I think.
Nice. All right. Well, again, thank you everybody for dialing in.
Thanks everyone.
We've got more and more people joining as we keep going. Well, it's the joy of a live stream. Everybody joins at different times of their lunch break, hopefully, to listen to this. Do put your questions in the comments. Martin and I will go back over the show and try and answer as many as we can. Again, please, if you've read the book, don't leave a review on Amazon. If you've enjoyed this show, give it a little reshare on your LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube feeds. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you, Martin and Puppy, for joining us in thundery London. I'm going to go get some sleep now after my flight back from Europe. Everybody have a great
well deserved.
See you later.
Thanks, everyone.